There were 3 answers. It was God, Jesus, Bible, and all of the questions could be answered with one of those 3 answers, or unless the answer just happened to be Satan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like every once in a while.
Trick question.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
My first experience was via podcast.
Oh,
So
that'll be a whole maybe season of a podcast.
And so one of our kids looks over and goes, "Oh, it's starting to crack," touches it and explodes in his face.
goodness,
Bloody nose.
I bet.
And we were like calling his parents immediately. And we were like, well, this might have been a fail. But
All right. Well, we are trying something new. This is episode 1 of 1 so far.
It's a new concept.
Brand new. I don't know if you ever heard of this before. It's called a podcast.
Tell me about it.
Well, there's these technological items called iPods.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So this will be casted on all the iPods out there. But
great.
but yeah, my name is Corey. If you somehow got to the podcast and don't know who I am, but we are starting this podcast and we're calling it Centering Conversations. Is that right, David? Is that what you decided?
Yep. Centering Conversations.
Okay, Centering Conversations, and so. Which really opens up a lot of possibilities in the future for lots of different kinds of conversations that we can have with people in our community, people in our church, just helping us, kind of extend our shared life and shared reality into our weeks and into the rest of our lives. So actually, we wanted to start our first conversation around this kind of concept of Epiphany, which if you gathered with us on Epiphany Sunday a few months ago, we talked about this story of the Magi going and being sent to go find this baby Jesus because this very jealous king wanted Jesus to not be around. And so the Magi are these like kind of astrologers, magic workers that would look to the sky and find answers for people. And so they do find Jesus, and at this moment they're faced with this decision: do we turn Jesus in, which would have been an incredible career advancing move for them, or do they turn themselves towards Jesus and embrace Jesus? So they're faced with this kind of this epiphany that changes the whole trajectory of their life. So we thought that maybe in episode 1 we would have a conversation with 3 people who have made changes in our lives around our church and our community in the last couple of years. I think I can still call myself new around here. I've been the pastor here just for 18 months. Also with me is Josh. You've been here how long now?
4 months.
4 months. And Kiki, you've been on staff for how long?
if we count the beginning when I was interim, then it was a year.
Let's count that.
So end year.
Yeah. So we've all made kind of life changes for various reasons. So why don't we, I'd love to maybe just kind of talk about some of those changes, maybe some of the things that went into what was going on in your head and heart that maybe led to you being willing to like reorient your life in response to something. So why don't we start, maybe have you kind of both share your first interaction with our community, with Westwinds. We can get into when you make, life-altering decisions to serve this community. But Kiki, why don't you share a little bit about how you ended up being a part of Westwinds?
So we moved here, I guess it's been like 3 years. And we moved out from where we used to live, and I was super involved, our family was super involved in the church. And so we knew one of the first things we needed to do was find a home church. And we were really blessed that it was actually during COVID, and most churches had gone to online, so we could check out some churches online. We watched Westwinds a few times. We watched several other churches a few times, and then we went in person. And our first service here in person, we came in, and they still had the pens, they're like boxes you could sit in as a family.
Like they use octagons?
Yeah.
Kind of thing? Yeah.
And so we sat in one of those as a family.
It's like mini UFC, but for families.
I thought you meant like a writing utensil.
No, a pen, not a pin. Yeah. And so it was really kind of fun for our family because we have 2 rambunctious boys, and they like to move around, and there was no kid stuff going on because of COVID restrictions, and we totally understood that. And but my boys felt free to kind of move around. They weren't, taking away from the service. They felt that freedom in that. And then when those boxes started to come down, we got more involved and we're here quite often. And we just felt like it was the place we were supposed to be. My oldest, we left one service. I don't know, we'd been here for maybe 2 services. And she goes, Mom, I just feel it. Like that feeling you have at summer camp when the Holy Spirit's like really there. And I said, yeah, I know what you're talking about. She goes, I feel that here. She's like, there's something working and moving here. And I was like, well, out of the mouth of babes. Yeah. And that's all it took. And we knew that this was home. Yeah.
So that was like very much felt like a decision you made as a family or.
Yeah. There was in no way was there not going to be a family decision. When you have 3 kids, you kind of have to make sure that they feel welcome and supported and like that this is their space too.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Josh, how about you? How did you end up here? What was your kind of first experience with Westwinds?
My first experience was via podcast.
Oh.
So I knew you because we grew up together.
That'll be a whole maybe season of a podcast.
Yeah.
There's no stories there.
There's not enough time, not enough tape to capture that. But I knew that you had come here from the West Coast, and just because you're my friend, I wanted to know, what is Corey doing in Jackson, Michigan? And so I started listening via podcast and hearing about what was happening at Westwinds and learning about some of the teaching and the people. And then you and I began having a conversation about life as in general and kind of the different phases and stages we were at. And it wasn't really the plan, but it led to a conversation about what would it look like to be a part of Westwinds. And I think my first exposure was really like that made me feel like Westwind was a special place was meeting some of the people here. I really felt like there was a hunger to know each other and to know God and go deeper with God. And they wanted people to walk with along the way there. And that seemed to be their focus and their hunger. This is an incredibly welcoming community, which I think is somewhat unique among communities in general, but this is a really welcoming place. And then just through our conversations, I began to wonder about what would it be like to be part of a church whose centering thing was not focused on what are the issues that divide us, but is there a person we can center around? And is that possible? Mm-hmm. And I think part of this journey is figuring that out. Like, can we actually do that in 2024 as a church in the Western Hemisphere?
And that's really hard because, I mean, most communities operate with bounds, right? And so, in a church setting, that could be doctrine or beliefs. It could be a denomination saying, like, these are the bounds of our community. And if you step outside them, you're out. And if you can stay inside them, you're in. And, we've been really wrestling with what does it look like to have a centered community or center set community where we center Jesus and the practices of Jesus and the way of Jesus. And belonging is just about, it's directional. It's just about moving towards Jesus, which sounds, I think, really nice and interesting. But I think in practice, it's something that we need to learn to do and kind of figure out together. I think bounded set community, wanting to put bounds on community is something that in different ways, we all long for in our heart or long for in our being. But then there's also this longing for it not to be that way. Being centered set means we don't really get to like pick the people around us. We're just saying, hey, if you're moving towards Jesus, we're in this together. And so we're learning to do that together. So that's cool. That's really cool. So how would you, and I guess we'll stick with you for a little bit. How did you make such a life altering decision? I mean, you were living in another state, had a great job, young family, and came here and are doing different things now. Like, how do you make such a large decision for your family, for yourself? What did that process look like for you?
I think that it actually wasn't scary, but I think because I've done it before and I have done enough things with God to know that it'll get figured out. And so I've just learned that when God brings you opportunities that you're invited to say yes to, that when you say yes, it'll be worth it.
Yeah.
And it'll be perfect, but it'll be worth it. And when this came in front of me, I felt like this is something that we could try as a family. And the worst thing would be that it didn't work out. But the best thing could have no limitations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Do you think there's been points along the way like that made that, like, it sounds like there's a trust involved, right, in your relationship with God or this calling, like, what, I guess I'm curious if there was like smaller steps early in your life that led to this not feeling scary.
yeah, it's been through a life of practices and preparation and experience, and having the opportunity to take those steps many times before, and saying yes the first time is the scariest. I remember like saying yes to Bible college, or saying yes to working at the camp that we both worked at that meant I made like no money to pay for college. But God was like, you should do this. And I was like,
Welcome to camp ministry.
It's basically child labor, but we won't talk about that right now. That's it.
That is camp ministry.
That's
though.
it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
but saying yes to those things, it was like, okay, I could trust God then. And then saying yes to, living in a van on the road with you for 5 or 6 years, there was many small steps that led to that lifestyle. And so just throughout life, saying yes over and over and over again really makes it easy to say yes later in life, or easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like these series of yeses. I think sometimes, when you're maybe younger in your faith or new to this kind of following Jesus experience, I don't know. I actually think like the early yeses, like the first, my family came to faith later in life, and there's like so much energy around coming to faith. Your first yes is really easy. You're just like, yeah, I just want to do like whatever, whatever I can do. You're just so, ambitious in faith. But the longer, we're Christians, the rest of life starts to happen. And I think sometimes there's seasons where those yeses are difficult, but.
And I think a lot of the time those yeses are tied around fun things. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about camp, like camp is really fun.
Right.
Or like going on a mission trip. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
And then, so you say yes to those things, then you get in situations where you're like, oh, this is actually hard too.
Yeah.
And so in this scenario that was easy to say yes to, with air quotes on there, you realize, oh, this is hard, but now I'm here.
Right.
But God will be faithful in the midst of this thing.
Yep.
And then you just learn to be able to say yes to things, even though you're like, is this going to work out?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, Kiki. So you fairly recently said a yes to me, at least. Started out as like, hey, can you just kind of interim, get us out of this season we're in?
Yeah, I took on like the paperwork aspect of it very quickly because I was like, well, that needs to be done, and that's something I've done before. I'd been working in kids ministry since I was 18, basically, like right out of high school. And, but yeah, so saying yes to like the paperwork and the organizing, that was a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were helping in kids, kind of a key volunteer for us. And we were looking for someone to kind of interim step in and just maintain what was already happening. And so we had a couple conversations, and you were pretty quick to be like, yeah, let's do this. And But then that yes led to another yes
Yeah.
when we eventually asked if we could take the interim title off. And
Yeah, that yes was harder.
yeah. Talk about that decision
Yeah.
for you. What was that like?
Man, I'd worked in kids ministry for 16 years, 17 years before coming out to Jackson area. And I kind of thought that had played its role in my life and had come to a natural conclusion with us moving. And I was kind of done in kidsmen. I was happy to help and assist and be part of, but I did not think like being in charge or that was going to be there again. And just the world of kids ministry itself tends to be formulaic. And, curriculums are all pretty much derivative of each other. There's not much variety. And I was kind of like, yeah, I'm done with that. There wasn't much creativity and definitely no curiosity involved. And most of the time it was for entertainment purposes. And so saying yes came with some caveats. Can we be creative? Can we be curious? Can we be Christ-centered? And can we be community-centered? And it was kind of those things that, that are very much Westwinds at its core. And it was like, if I can do this in that, then yeah, let's do this. And it's looked different, and it's taken some figuring out. But each time we do something, it's like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing still? All right, let's keep going.
Yeah. What is it about you that made those things so important to you?
I think being community-centered or being relationship-centered with the kids has seen more growth in kids. Jeff and I are still really connected with some of the kids that we started with in children's ministry when they were in 3rd and 4th grade. Like we've gone to their weddings, we've gone to their baby showers. We are still in relationship with those kids. And we've seen that relationship makes more change towards Jesus than whether or not they learned the 10 Commandments or can tell me the books of the Bible. Yeah, those things can be important, but those relationships were the most important aspect of getting them to the end goal, which was an adult relationship fully dependent upon God. And that's where my heart was. I was kind of sad at the kids who only kind of came once in a while, and you could see that their relationship with God didn't play out the same as those who had relationship outside of just mom and dad, outside of just the church building itself, but relationship with the people in the church. And so I really thought if we could community center our relationships around Christ with the kids, that would be important. And that would be the piece that gets them through junior high, and that's the piece that gets them through high school, and that gets them through college or career. But I'm really excited when our old kids call us and say, hey, we're volunteering with the middle schoolers, and P.S., I am sorry for what we put you through. And we've gotten those phone calls and those notes in the mail, and we treasure those things, like deeply treasure those things. And we just, I think those relationships lead me to say yes over and over and over again with kids, because I want those relationships to keep going until I'm old and totally gray-haired, not just the few I have. That makes it worth it.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah. And I think intuitively this makes sense, right? That I think we've all, if we think back on our life, these relationships in our life that have been so formational for us, we at least if we're remembering good things, we remember the conversations with people in our life growing up, the even just the sense of like having adults around you that you're like, they love me and care about me. There's like a safety in that.
Yes.
But I think there's also this fear for those of us, like, actually all of us here have kids. Sometimes there's this fear of like, well, did I teach my kids? Do they know the things they need to know to get through life? And so I think sometimes we've maybe swung in the church a little too hard in this direction of just like teaching kids a morality. When I think intrinsically deeper than that, we know that like that's not what's deeply formational.
Yeah.
It's living examples of people living in the way of Jesus that model that in different ways. Yeah. And now we have like a lot of data that shows that. Like I've read it, extensive studies this year on like child formation, and they all have like different markers, but they all share was one marker that's the same across the board. Is that for kids, relationships with adults who follow Jesus
They matter.
leads to way higher faith retention in their life, and so that's really, really, really huge. So, what is this? What does it look like in kids? I mean, what is having like a more curiosity approach or a centering approach? Like, can you maybe like bring me into the room? Because my kids, you know, like I ask them about Sunday, and sometimes they're like, my son is like, you know, like, like whatever. And then my Luisa will just kind of start talking and then end up talking about something else because she just keeps talking herself somewhere else.
Yep.
But what does that look like from maybe a discipleship standpoint or formation standpoint? Like, how are those conversations different than maybe what, you know, we grew up with in kids ministry?
Yeah. So when we grew up in, at least when I grew up in kids ministry, like there were 3 answers. It was God, Jesus, Bible, and all of the questions could be answered with one of those 3 answers, or unless the answer just happened to be Satan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like every once in a while.
Trick question.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
But you know, we tend to ask more questions that are curiosity driven. So like we'll say, let me give a real example. So a couple of Sundays ago, we did the story where Jesus is left behind in the temple. And we talked about what questions do you think he asked?
So Jesus is a kid.
He
runs away from his parents at the temple.
He totally knew what he was doing.
Yeah,
He's
parents
Jesus.
are like, where do you go?
Right, exactly. His parents are, where do you go? It took his parents 3 days to find him in the temple. But one of the things it says in the scriptures is that they were impressed with the questions he asked. So we talked about questions that week and how it's okay to ask questions in prayer and to God and to your parents and to church. It's okay to ask questions. And we went over like, you know, the 5 W's that you learn in school, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. But we also talked about like, what questions do you think Jesus was asking? How do you think his parents felt? How do you think Jesus felt? We asked questions that don't have right or wrong answers. They don't have, and one of the questions the kids were like, you know, I wonder if he asked like how many frogs there were when the plagues came. You know, like it's silly stuff, but that's what we want them to do. We want them to be silly. We want them to feel like we can ask all the questions we want to ask, and that asking questions is not necessary. It isn't a diminishing of our faith. We're not questioning our faith.
Right.
We just want to know what we know what we believe, and we want to know it better. And we get to know someone by asking them questions. You can't really get to know God if it's a one-sided conversation. You've got to be involved. You've got to be part of it. And so we wanted them to ask questions.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the weeks my son did tell me some things.
Oh, good.
Because he talked about like you taught them like a 5-finger prayer around those, like who, what, when, why, how. Yeah. And so he was explaining to me like this is, you know, that he can pray using his hand, which was such a powerful experience, right? And and even for me, like now that's like I can think about prayer in that way too. These simple, you know, practices that we can give kids are powerful in that. So, Josh, talk to me a little bit about, so, you know, you have changed your life, brought your family, you know, you're here, bought a house, the whole deal, and now you're at Westwinds. So like, what do you do here? Like, what's kind of your role? But I'd love to, talk a little bit about what you do, but more about like why that's something you want to do with your life.
Yeah, I sit in meetings with you and hear crazy ideas and try and help make them happen. That's
you have to weed half of them out, but yes.
So I do all kinds of things, and that's part of the reason why I think this phase of Westwinds appealed to me, is that there's so much opportunity to do stuff and to breathe life into an exciting time at Westwinds. And there's lots of ways and areas that Westwinds is growing and ready to grow. And so I help with things that happen in the services for adults, as far as ideas and planning and brainstorming. I help with systems and processes. I help with communications things in print or in the app or in the website. I sit with people in meetings and pray or talk about how do we help people take their next steps in their faith. And yeah, stuff like that.
And why do you care about any of
He's
that?
underselling the fact that he's the most organized of the staff members.
Yes,
He keeps everything in a level of organization that's just amazing.
Absolutely.
That must be a low bar then, because I don't always feel that way.
I have a really high bar for that, because like my mom has the gift of administration. I don't understand it. It is not my world, but she has it, and I'm like, ooh, he's doing the things.
Yeah, I'm like Josh. Just give me a system to follow.
Yes.
And I will follow it mostly. But why? Why would you want to do those things? I mean, I know you. Like you could have a career in the marketplace. I mean, all the skill set you have. You could work for a big company. You could start business. I mean, you've started businesses. Like, I mean, there's a lot of other things you could do with this same skill set. Why bring that into the church?
Yeah. Well, selfishly, I find it rewarding, and so that's a decent motivation for something. Like it gives me purpose and meaning, but I guess that meaning comes from feeling like I'm a part of what God's doing in a place, which I think is a unique privilege, and I love to be a part of things like that. And my ultimate hope is that people who are looking for healing or hope or purpose or their own meaning will find that through a relationship with God and with Jesus. And I think that the tools that He's given the church, He's given me and given our team, help that process. Because there are just so many ways we can find to not follow God. Even though might be the best option, we can get in our way so easily. I know in my own life, that's so true. And so if we can come up with all different avenues to come alongside somebody and help them experience the goodness of God, like experience the ability to be able to trust Him like we talked about. Like that's a really hard thing to get to. And I don't know if it's ever super easy, but it can get easier. And so the chance to come alongside somebody in their faith and say, pastors aren't special. They've just had more time maybe. And so how can we walk alongside somebody? And so the things that I get to do, like organization or communications or planning service moments, hopefully help somebody take it a tiny baby step closer to God, be a little more open to God, maybe, and hopefully like we all look a little bit more like Jesus, and that is inviting people into His presence to also experience the same thing.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's creating space for people to say those yeses, those early yeses, right? To come full circle on that. That's good. So, well, we all need to get back to work today, but we could talk forever, and I think we'll have this conversation over years, the three of us. I'm looking forward to more of these kind of moments, but maybe I'll just kind of close with this, that a practice in my life, we think about the story of the Magi. I think they're like looking for Jesus with one intention, and they encounter Jesus, and their whole trajectory of their life changes. As I said, that kind of first big yes from there. But one of the things that has been a common practice of mine is I have this prayer that I repeat like all the time in prayer, that I'll just be praying, and and one of my kind of closing statements always will be like, God, I want you to know that my answer to you is yes before you ask. And it's just been a way for me to position my heart. And so I'll just say that if you're listening to this, you're in your car, you're on your run, and there's something in front of you that you are feeling like God might be inviting you into, I hope you could have the courage to say yes, and watch how God kind of gives you the faith you need to keep taking those steps. But maybe you're also in a season where you don't have anything in front of you. It just you feel like I'm in a middle space, a holding pattern. That prayer for me in those kinds of seasons have helped align my heart so that when those big yeses come, my heart is already there. Like I've been looking for the yes, and I think allows me to stay grounded in this kind of position of surrender. So maybe as this podcast ends, you could just You could press pause. You could, before you, get out of the car and walk into the house or walk into work, you could just take a minute and breathe and try that prayer. God, my answer to you is yes before you ask. Maybe it's a interaction you're about to have today. Maybe it's a major decision you're making in life or somewhere in between. Just say, God, my answer to you is yes before you ask. And it's totally normal to keep repeating a phrase like that until it settles in, So maybe it's just kind of repeating it over and over again until your spirit is settled and you can go on with your day or your next moment. So this was podcast 1. David, how'd we do?
It was pretty great.
Pretty great?
It was good, yeah.
You got enough material there to work with?
Oh, yeah. This is a good start.
Good start.
A few bumps in the road, but what?
Okay. Yeah.
Literally my knee on the table.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for doing this, David. I'm excited for the journey ahead.
I feel centered from that conversation.
Great.
Awesome. That's great.